Hi, everybody, and welcome to Love Fraud Live. When you finally realize that everything the sociopath told you was a lie and your whole involvement was nothing but exploitation, you're crushed. The last thing you need is people criticizing you for believing the lies, but they do. I'm Donna Anderson, author of lovefraud.com and host of the True Lovefraud Stories podcast. After betrayal by a sociopath, I help you to understand what happened, put down the emotional burden, and move forward. Tonight, I'll offer 5 realities to help you when you're judged for believing the sociopath. At the end of my short presentation, I'll answer your questions. Please subscribe to Love Fraud Live. When you do, you'll be notified about all of my upcoming YouTube videos. Okay, let's get started. I know what it's like to be judged. It just happened to me. Now, I've been talking about my marriage to a sociopathic con man for years. 3 times I've told my story on a reality TV show. The latest show was called Love, Honor, Betray, and it recently became available on HBO Max and Hulu. My story is episode 6 and is called Too Good to Be True. So, not long ago, I received the following email. Hi, Donna. Saw you on Love, Honor, Betray. During the whole thing, I thought you were goofy and silly. The instant a man would ask me to pay our way, I would, and did once, open the door and throw him out to his next silly victim. You were silly putty in his hands. You don't have kids, so you probably don't know. Silly putty is a clay-like stuff that kids play with. He recognized that you were silly putty, desperate and goofy. Bet he wouldn't bother messing with me for longer than our first conversation. Ouch. Even though I am well and truly over the emotional trauma caused by the sociopath, such criticism still hurts. Luckily, it only hurts briefly. I've been away from my experience for decades, so I've had plenty of time to recover. But how do you cope when the betrayal is fresh and raw? Well, here are 5 realities to help shift your perspective. The goal is to brush off the hurtful words and focus on your healing. Reality number 1. Sociopaths are professional exploiters and manipulators. Sociopaths are genetically predisposed to use others, specifically due to their out-of-control drive for dominance. They start young. They spend their lives trying different manipulation strategies, and primarily through trial and error, they learn what works. If you encounter them when you're young, you don't have the tools to escape them. If you meet as adults, they've been doing it all their lives and have perfected their strategies. So if one of these slick operators targets you, you don't stand a chance. Here's reality number 2. Your only flaw was being human. Most humans, the 88% of us who are not sociopaths, are biologically programmed to trust. Our bodies manufacture a hormone called oxytocin, which is released during intimacy. Any kind of intimacy will trigger it, certainly sex, but even hugs or conversation. Oxytocin makes you trust the person with whom you share the intimacy. This is how the human race survived. We learned to trust each other so that we could successfully live in groups. When you believe trust, and help people, you are doing exactly what humans are supposed to do. Here's reality number 3. The critic is probably incredibly lucky. You don't fall for sociopath's lies because you're stupid. You fall because you are vulnerable. The AARP, which is the American Association of Retired Persons, conducted research for years trying to find the character flaw that makes people vulnerable to scams. Guess what? There isn't any. AARP found that anyone can succumb to a scam at certain times of their lives. When people are emotional, lonely, or in transition, they are vulnerable. Sociopaths are opportunists. If they sense vulnerability, they strike. So the person criticizing you probably hasn't encountered a sociopath when they were going through a bad time. They didn't escape because of intelligence. It was simply luck. Here's reality number 4. Don't engage with the critic. Seek support from people who understand. People who have not personally experienced the manipulation of a sociopath simply do not understand how it happens. They can't appreciate how good sociopaths are at manipulating your dreams, confusing you, and wearing down your self-esteem. So when you're criticized, it's probably best not to engage. Instead, find people who have shared your experience and truly understand it, like other members of the Love Fraud community. And finally, here's reality number 5. Focus on feeling compassion for yourself. You don't need someone else to criticize you because you're already criticizing yourself. But what's done is done. You can't change the past. You can only work towards a better future, and yes, it is certainly achievable. The first step is to feel compassion for yourself. You never intended to get yourself into this mess. You were vulnerable. You encountered a shark who took advantage of your humanity. In fact, maybe this unfortunate experience can motivate you to heal the internal wounds that made you vulnerable to the sociopath in the first place. With that, you can move towards the life that you truly want. So, those are the 5 realities. If you're criticized for falling for the sociopath, keep them in mind. Remember that whoever is criticizing you has not walked in your shoes. So, here's the end of my story. A few days after I heard from the woman who called me silly and goofy, I received an email from another of the show's viewers. This man expressed sympathy for me and was glad that my ex didn't physically hurt me. He then shared his own experience with a friend he knew for years who sounded like a sociopath. The guy kept manipulating, kept asking for money, and the man who wrote to me eventually had to go no contact. Now, this was far more typical of the feedback that I've received over the years. Most people commend me for telling my story and starting Love Fraud to help others. The thing to understand is that we all view what happens to others through the filter of our own life experiences. Some people will understand what happened with the sociopaths, but many won't. So, if someone criticizes you, just let it roll off your back. Don't let it get in the way of your own recovery. So, that's the presentation for tonight. If you're dealing with a psychopath, antisocial, or narcissist, reach out to me. I can help you understand what happened, put down the emotional burden, and move forward. For more information, visit lovefraud.com/talk to Donna. Now I'll answer your questions, so please go ahead and type your comments and questions into the chat. feel free to ask me anything related to this presentation or not. Okay, so Debbie has a comment. It's their job 24/7. So, not sure who they are. If you want to clarify, Debbie, feel free to do that. But I would imagine that you're talking about the sociopath. Yeah, it is their job 24/7. I mean, this is how sociopaths live their lives. They are genetically designed to be exploiters, to be manipulators. And we talked about that last week in my interview with Dr. Liane Leedom. She went into detail about why sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists cannot authentically love. And it's built into their personalities. It's who they are. And so, yes, that's their job 24/7, is simply taking advantage of others. So the AARP research was really interesting. And the AARP conducted this research for like 20 years. They were trying to find what character flaw made people vulnerable to scams. And the reason they wanted to do this was if they could identify why people would fall for a scam, then they would put the information out everywhere so that anybody who had this particular personality trait or character flaw would recognize that they were at risk and be especially careful. So, as I said, they never found it. There is no personality trait that makes you susceptible to scams. And since everything that sociopaths do is a scam, I would say it's the same thing that makes you susceptible to a sociopath. So what AARP found is that the issue or the problem isn't who you are, it's where you are or how you are, where you are in your life, what's going on in your life. And they found 4 factors that contribute to people falling for scams. The first one was stressful life events. We're talking about a death, losing a job, being in transition. You know, sometimes things happen between like high school and college, or between college and a career. In fact, that's why a lot of the religious cults target young people, because they're in that space where they don't have anything solid at the moment, you know, if they're in between like college and a career. So that's one of the vulnerabilities, is stressful life events. Another one is less social or family support. That means if you don't have a good social network, that can make you vulnerable. The other thing is strong emotions. Now, the emotions can be either positive or negative. And this is one of the interesting things that they found, is that, you know, you could either be angry or upset or worried on one end, or you could be in love. And so it doesn't matter what the emotion is, as long as it's a strong emotion. And then the fourth thing is, if you've been targeted by scammers before, you're likely to be targeted again. In fact, they found that people who had been targeted already were 60% more likely to get scammed again. One would think that they learn, but that's not the way it works. Essentially, also what happens is that, especially now with online scamming, you know, once you're scammed, you get on a list. And, you know, these fraudsters are out selling the list and say, you know, here are vulnerable people. So that's an important reason why it's so important to protect yourself, because, you know, once it happens to you, then you get on the list, and that's like really bad. But anyway, so how did AARP figure this out? Well, in the course of doing this research, they actually went to prisons and talked to people who had been convicted of fraud, that, you know, had done it, and essentially asked them, well, What's the deal? What do you guys do? How do you get this to work? And they told them. And the key thing is, as I said before, was the con artists told the researchers what they tried to do was get people into a heightened emotional state. And they actually have a term for it. It's called putting people under the ether. And what that means is they're trying to get them worked up. They're trying to get them so that they're not thinking clearly. And that's what emotions do. You know, when you're worked up, you are not thinking clearly, because that's the way emotions work. You know, emotions are often, they're providing you with information. Now, the information may be, if you have an emotion like fear, the information is that there's danger around you. Or if you feeling love, the information is that it's safe. So, you know, that's what emotions essentially are. They're providing you with information. But what happens is that when you're overly emotional, when there's too much going on, and, you know, you're all worked up, or you're crazy in love, or any of those things, your thinking brain goes dark. I mean, in fact, they see that in MRIs. You know, the lights go out in your brain. So that's where the fraudsters, the con artists want you to be. They want you to be so emotional that you're not thinking straight. And I know about this because that's what happened to me. So that's why it's so important to be able to think straight and to be able to see what's really going on. And Dr. Liane Leedom talks about this in her presentations. And that's why this is actually the key of the series, the webinar series that she put together, which is called Skills for Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, Gaslighting, and Toxic Stress. And the whole idea is to get you back to your thinking brain so that you can make wise decisions. And the way that Dr. Leedom teaches you to do that is through mindfulness. And what mindfulness means is paying attention to reality without judgment, paying attention to what's going on, not what you want to go on, not what you hope will go on, but what is actually there. And without being attached to it, just without judgment. Okay, this is the deal. This is the situation. You know, just try and get it as cut and dry as you can. So it's a wonderful program. And of course, we've mentioned it multiple times. I keep talking about it because it's so good. But anyway, the introductory webinar is free, and it's called Your First Step Towards Real Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse and Trauma. And so there's links in the window below the video. So I hope you all take a look at it, check it out. It's truly can really help you to not only get over what have happened, but the tools will help you to live your life. Okay, we have more comments. Yes, so Debbie says, yes, she was talking about the sociopath. Okay, I interpreted that. All right, Scorpio Bird says, Donna, that email was so mean and untrue. I do understand people judge me for still talking to my sociopathic parents after all the harm they've done for 40 years. Hard to find empathy and understanding. Yes. It's really hard to let go of emotions, even when the emotions are attached to people who harm you, who are dangerous to you. And there are trauma bonds. I mean, that's another thing that goes on, and we'll be talking about trauma bonds a lot in the future. But what a trauma bond is, it means it's an attachment to someone who is destructive to you. And they can be undone. It does take time. Mindfulness is very helpful in doing that. So it's important to learn how to do that, because the problem with sociopaths, as Debbie noted before, this is what they do 24/7. So they aren't going to change. These people are not going to change. So it's up to you to be able to see clearly what's going on so that you can protect yourself. Okay, so YouTube is social, interesting name, says, thank you for being such a great advocate for so many people. What is a good way to deal with someone who has a good public face and really only displays sociopathic behavior in private? Oh boy. Okay, that happens a lot. In fact, that's, um, I've heard that so many times, especially people talking about spouses and family members. I mean, they go out, say it's like your husband, and he's husband of the year, and he's father of the year, as long as has an audience or he's in church. Of course, women do this too. People have told me about their mothers who were, fabulous and like they're school teachers, and when they're in school they're terrific and they contribute and they're calm, and when they get home it's like a nightmare. In fact, we have a podcast about that. It's the one about I could have been my mother's third victim, and this woman who told her story talked exactly about that, where her mother was a school teacher and she went to the school and everything was great, except when they got home it was like two different people, which was very confusing to her because there's one person out in public and then a totally different person when you're home, and coming to terms with that was difficult for her. So it kind of, to answer the question, it kind of depends on the relationship and where you are. It's kind of hard to answer this generally, but just, I guess one approach would be the advice that we give to people who are dealing with a smear campaign, and maybe sometimes that's part of what's going on, maybe not. But the idea is to figure out who really needs to know the truth. If there's someone who believes the image, the charade, that is in a position to influence what happens to you, maybe they need to know the truth. But it can be very difficult. I mean, sometimes people just see what they see and they'll have a hard time believing you, and so the key then is to figure out who you need to enlighten, shall we say, and who you can just ignore, because you're not going to be able to change everybody's mind. It just doesn't work that way. So, but of course, this for you, I mean, if you're seeing the bad behavior in private, you need to protect yourself. You need to understand that what is being shown in public is an act, a charade, a mask, and what you're seeing, the bad behavior that you're seeing in private, is the real deal. That's what the person really is. So definitely make your decisions based on what you are seeing in private. Okay. Well, that appears to be all the questions that we have for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. Please be sure to check out the True Lovefraud Stories podcast. That's the one that I just mentioned, and that's where survivors tell their own outrageous stories of betrayal. I also interview experts who address the issues that are raised in the stories. So you can listen to the podcast here on YouTube or YouTube Music or at lovefraud.com/podcasts. And finally, please subscribe to Love Fraud Live. When you subscribe, you'll automatically be notified about all my new videos. And plus, by subscribing, you boost the distribution of Love Fraud Live, so you help to spread the word about all these dangerous sociopaths who live among us. You'll find lots of helpful links in the window below the video. Hope you'll check it out. And also hope you'll be here next week, next Wednesday, for the next episode of Love Fraud Live. Thank you, and good night.